Hi there, back on the beach again, the beach bum, the astrologer beach bum. Anyway, what shall I talk about now? I don't rehearse these things, by the way, there's no script. So you'll have to check out certain details if you're interested. But I was looking at the next lunar eclipse that occurs on the 5th of June this year, which is quite interesting really. The lunar eclipse is basically a super full moon, and a full moon is when the sun and moon are in opposition, and that's why we tend to look at full moon as a potentially challenging time, or an eruptive time, or a culminating period. And when there's a lunar eclipse, we're looking at something more that's going to occur around the time of the eclipse. We're looking at perhaps something which may affect matters over the next 6 months. I can only generalize from the perspective of one eclipse. You have to consider other matters such as the solar eclipse and so forth. But I'm just focusing on that lunar eclipse because the moon will be in Sagittarius, which means the sun is in Gemini. And that's quite relevant for our two esteemed leaders, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, both of whom are Gemini. Interesting thing about Trump is that Uranus is right bang next to his sun, which may give rise to that rather unpredictable side of him that we have been witness to rather too often. Whereas Boris Johnson has Venus bang on his sun. Some would say it's combust, in fact, so it's only a few minutes away from the sun. I've forgotten how many actually, maybe about 14, 15 minutes, something like that. So in astrology, that could be regarded as a somewhat compromised Venus. And he has Libra rising in his chart too, which means that Venus rules his chart. And it's quite interesting that when he was hospitalized a little while back, transiting Venus was exactly conjunct his Mars in the 8th house. The 8th house is not the best place for health, but he got through it. Unfortunately, Venus will be going backwards anytime soon, and although it won't meet Mars again, it will be going back into his 8th house. But anyway, back to the lunar eclipse. What's interesting about it is that Venus will be close to the sun, and it's what we call a mutable eclipse. It's also part of what we call a mutable T-square, and at the apex of this T-square is Mars in Pisces. This is interesting. I'm just changing direction. This is interesting because it does actually suggest highly volatile energies and a need for maximum flexibility. The other complication about this T-square is that Mars is quite close to Neptune. And Mars and Neptune, generally speaking, don't get on too well. Mars is all about being directional, cutting, specific, whereas Neptune is all about fog. It's about abstraction, shapelessness. And when the two come together, there can be the challenge of somehow working through a problem in a different way. So what does that mean for Boris and Donald? Well, who knows? But we know that we're going through an immensely difficult time with the coronavirus, lockdown and all the rest of it. And it does suggest to me that June for both men, and maybe for different reasons, will be facing considerable opposition in their ways of dealing with crisis. And certainly what will complicate matters for President Trump is that Uranus will more or less be square Mars at that time, which is very, very eruptive and volatile. So both men are going to be presented with challenges which at the moment are difficult to define, but which have at the heart the need for action, and yet action of a very different kind. And the decisions they make in June will be relevant for the rest of the year, because the lunar eclipse takes us right up to Christmas time approximately. And for both men, I would say, I'm not going to make forecasts because there are lots of other considerations that need to be factored in, but certainly some kind of turning point for both can be assumed and may have a bearing on their political futures. For Trump, perhaps more specifically in 2020, because of course on November the 3rd there's the presidential election. On the day, things don't look too bad for Trump, actually. But there are a lot of things happening before November the 3rd, each of which could actually bring him down. I don't say that any will succeed, but the threat is there. And of course, we know we have the advantage of knowing that we're in the midst of something quite unprecedented in our generation. And the skies certainly paint a very complex picture for both. Anyway, I think I'll finish there for now. The purpose of these talks is really just to talk through certain aspects. Not all of you will follow what I'm saying, and even those who do follow what I say may disagree, which is fine. I can live with that. Anyway, it's quite a calm evening. I hear that it's going to turn cold and windy, but at the moment it's just not sultry, but just lovely, peaceful. And thank you for listening.